The transport ship touched down on a smooth white platform. The doors opened with a soft hiss. Elias stepped out first. The air was cool and carried the scent of damp stone and clean metal. Above him, towers of pale material rose high into the sky. They curved like thick tree trunks and glowed with a soft blue light. Strange plants with silver leaves grew along the walkways. Everything was neat. Everything was quiet. A line of guards waited for him. They were tall and thin, with smooth, pale skin and large, dark eyes. They wore armor that looked like woven glass. None of them spoke. They only watched him. Elias kept his hands at his sides. He moved slowly. He did not want to startle them. He knew what they thought of him. To them, he was just a human. Simple, soft, built for a harsh and messy world, not for a perfect place like this. They called his people baseline. It was a polite word for weak. He had heard it many times before. He never argued. He had learned long ago that silence was stronger than pride. He followed the guards through a wide archway. The floors were smooth and warm under his boots. The walls hummed with a low, steady sound. It felt like a slow heartbeat. Elias listened to it carefully. He noted every detail. He always did. At the end of the long hall, a woman stood waiting. She was the queen. Her name was Lyria. She wore a long robe that shifted color like water in sunlight. Her posture was straight. Her face was calm and unreadable. She looked at him with the same quiet distance the guards had shown. This was not a meeting of lovers. It was a meeting of tools. His world needed peace. Her empire needed a treaty. They were being joined to keep both sides from breaking. "Welcome, Elias Vance," she said. Her voice was clear and soft. "You are safe here. You will want for nothing." "Thank you, Your Majesty," he replied. He kept his voice level. He did not bow too low. He did not stand too tall. He found the middle ground. She gave a small nod and turned away. A servant led him to his rooms. The quarters were large and bright. The bed was wide and soft. The windows looked out over the city. Everything was designed for comfort, but Elias did not sit. He walked to the wall. He placed his palm against it. The surface was warm. The hum was slightly uneven here. He pressed harder. A faint flicker ran through the light veins in the stone. It lasted only a second. He stepped back. He made a mental note. The system was stressed. It was hiding it well, but it was there. Over the next few days, Elias kept to himself. He ate when food was brought. He walked the outer gardens when allowed. He spoke only when spoken to. The Valen court treated him like a quiet guest. They smiled politely. They avoided his eyes. They never asked about Earth. They never asked what humans thought. To them, he was decoration, a symbol, a simple creature placed in a golden room. But Elias was not watching the room. He was watching the walls. He noticed how the elders avoided certain halls. He noticed how the guards checked their weapons more often. He noticed the way the air machines groaned when the wind shifted. Once he heard two officials speaking in low tones near a fountain. They used the word weave. It meant something to them. It sounded heavy, worried. They stopped when they saw him. They walked away fast. He filed it all away. He did not panic. He did not guess. He collected facts. Humans had survived ice, fire, disease, and war. They did not do it by being perfect. They did it by paying attention, by learning the shape of the danger before it struck. Elias was doing the same. He let them believe he was slow. He let them believe he was simple. It gave him room to see what they missed. The wedding day arrived. The grand hall was filled with light. Thousands of Valen stood in neat rows. Their robes shimmered. The air was thick with sweet scent and soft music. Elias walked down the long aisle. His suit was plain. It felt heavy. He did not look left or right. He kept his eyes forward. At the altar, Lyria waited. She looked like a statue carved from moonlight. Perfect, still, untouchable. The high speaker began the old words. The ceremony was long and precise. Every step had a meaning. Every pause had a rule. Elias followed it all. He repeated the vows in the alien tongue. He had practiced them for weeks. His pronunciation was clean. His tone was steady. When the moment came to join hands, he reached out slowly. Their fingers touched. A sharp spark jumped between them. It was not fire. It was not simple static. It was a sudden pull, like a tight wire snapping into place. Lyria flinched. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second. Then her calm mask returned. She pulled her hand back just enough to break the contact. The crowd did not seem to notice. The music continued. The speaker finished the rite. Elias kept his face calm. He gave no sign that he had felt anything at all. But he had. The spark was not random. It had direction. It had weight. It felt like a door opening in a room he did not know existed. He let his hands fall to his sides. He bowed his head as the ceremony ended. The crowd cheered in quiet, measured tones. Banners were raised. Glasses were lifted. The treaty was sealed. Later that night, Elias stood alone on a high balcony. The city spread out below him. The glowing towers pulsed in slow rhythm. The wind was cold. He rested his arms on the railing and looked at his hands. They were human hands, scarred, calloused, built for work, not for ceremony. The Valen saw them as weak. They saw his kind as fragile. They thought they had married a simple man to a perfect queen. He smiled faintly. They were wrong. He had not come to rule. He had not come to conquer. He had come to learn. He had felt the spark. He had seen the flickers in the walls. He had heard the fear in their quiet words. The empire was not as stable as it looked. The perfect systems were straining. The rigid minds were blind to the cracks, and he was the only one watching. He turned away from the edge. He walked back inside. The doors closed softly behind him. The quiet hum of the palace followed him down the hall. He did not know what the weave was. He did not know why his touch had triggered a reaction. But he knew one thing for certain. They had married him to the stars. He had come to learn how they burned the days after the wedding settled into a quiet rhythm. Elias kept to his routine. He walked the outer gardens when the sun was high. He read the few books the library allowed. He ate his meals alone, but the silence did not last. One evening, a soft knock came at his door. He opened it to find Queen Lyria standing in the dim hall light. She wore a plain dark robe. Her crown was missing. Her shoulders looked heavy. She asked if she could enter. He stepped aside and let her in. She walked to the large window. She did not sit. She stared out at the glowing city. The pale towers pulsed with a slow blue light. Elias closed the door. He waited. He knew she had not come for small talk. She spoke first. She said people told her he walked at night. She said he watched the walls. She said he listened to the air machines. He replied that listening was a human habit. He told her silence hides things, but noise tells the truth. She turned to face him. Her dark eyes held a new weight. She said they called him simple. They said his kind broke under pressure. He answered that humans do not break. They bend. They crack. They fix what they can. They build on top of ruins. He said perfection leaves no room to grow. She let out a slow breath. It sounded like a weight leaving her chest. She admitted they had forgotten how to bend. They had optimized themselves. They had removed every flaw from their bodies and their minds. They made their thoughts sharp and straight. But now the weave was failing and they did not know how to fix it. Elias felt a dull pressure behind his eyes. He rubbed his temple. The low hum of the palace shifted. For a moment, he heard two sounds at once. The steady pulse of the lights and a faint, ragged tear underneath it. He blinked. The feeling passed. He blamed it on the new air, on the long days, on simple stress. She noticed. She asked if he felt it too. He admitted he sometimes got headaches. He mentioned a strange pulse in the walls. He said it was nothing serious. She told him it was the weave reaching out. She said his mind was not locked like theirs. She said he was open to the noise. They had sealed themselves away from chaos. He had been born inside it. Before he could answer, a sharp knock came at the door. A guard stood outside. His voice was tight. He said the council needed her. The outer ring had lost power again. Lyria closed her eyes. She said she would come. She looked at him one last time and thanked him for listening. She said most people there only knew how to speak. She left. The room felt heavier after she was gone. Elias sat on the edge of the bed. He pressed his fingers to his temples. The pressure returned. This time it brought a flash of images, cracks in glass, a river changing course, a child tying two broken sticks together with frayed thread. He shook his head. The vision faded. He told himself it was just fatigue, but the court was changing. He noticed it in the way the guards looked at him. The polite smiles were gone. The nods were stiff. Whispers followed him down the long halls. He caught words like contamination and baseline error. A new group had risen. They called themselves the Pure. They believed his presence was poisoning the weave. They said the Empire needed a clean break. They wanted to let the failing systems collapse so the strong could rise again from the ashes. They called it a controlled rebirth. Elias did not argue with them. He did not defend himself. He watched them. He memorized their faces. He noted which ones carried the old weapons. He noted which ones avoided the main halls. Humans had faced angry crowds before. They knew how to read the wind before the storm hit. 3 nights later, the palace alarm sounded. It was not a loud siren. It was a deep, vibrating chime that shook the floor. Elias stood quickly. He ran into the hall. Servants and guards moved in tight, panicked lines. The lights flickered. The hum of the walls turned into a harsh grind. He followed the sound of running footsteps to the central spire. A heavy door stood open. Inside, Lyria lay on a raised platform. Crystalline wires hung from the ceiling. They connected to a crown-like device on her head. Her body trembled. Her eyes were closed. Her skin was pale. 2 engineers stood nearby. Their hands moved fast over a control panel. They spoke in worried tones. One said the core was rejecting the alignment. She had pushed too deep. The other said to pull her out. He warned that if the feedback looped, it would take the whole sector. They reached for the release lever. Elias stepped forward. He did not shout. He did not push. He simply walked to the platform. The engineers froze. He ignored them. He looked at Lyria. The wires around her were vibrating hard. The air smelled like ozone and burnt sugar. He knew, without understanding how, that pulling her out now would snap the connection. It would leave her mind trapped in the broken current. He knelt beside her. He placed his bare hand on the cool stone near her head. Then slowly, he pressed his palm against her temple. The moment his skin touched hers, the room dropped away. He did not hear the engineers. He did not see the flashing lights. He felt a rushing river of light and sound. It was wild. It was tangled. It was screaming in a dozen broken patterns. The Valen had tried to straighten it. They had tried to force it into clean lines. It had fought back. It was tearing itself apart. Elias did not fight it. He did not try to fix it. He let it flow through him. His mind did not lock up. It opened. It found the spaces between the noise. It found the rhythm hidden in the chaos. He breathed slowly. He matched his pulse to the uneven beat of the weave. He thought of old songs. He thought of rain on a tin roof. He thought of hands mending a torn net. He offered it not order but acceptance. The trembling under his hand stopped. The harsh grind in the walls softened. The flickering lights steadied into a warm, steady glow. The crystalline wires stopped vibrating. They settled into a slow, gentle pulse. Elias kept his palm pressed to her skin. He felt her breath return. It was shallow at first, then deeper. The engineers stood frozen. They stared at the control panels. The readings were stable. The core had not collapsed. It had shifted. It was working again, but differently. The pattern was no longer rigid. It was flexible. It breathed. Lyria's eyes opened. They were wide. They focused on him. There was no calm mask now. There was fear. There was wonder. There was a clear, sharp recognition. She saw him, not as a guest, not as a symbol, as a key. Elias slowly lowered his hand. His head pounded. His fingers felt numb. He stood up. He stepped back. The room felt normal again. The air was still. The hum was smooth. She sat up slowly. The wires detached on their own and retracted into the ceiling. She looked at the engineers and told them to leave. Her voice was quiet but firm. They bowed and hurried out. The heavy door closed. Only the 2 of them remained. She looked at her hands. Then she looked at him. She whispered that he did not fix it. He said he just let it be broken so it could find a new way to hold together. She nodded slowly. She said the Pure would not accept this. They would call it corruption. He replied that they could call it what they wanted. Broken things fit together better than perfect ones. They have edges that catch. They have space to grow. She stood. She was weak, but her spine was straight. The distant queen was gone. In her place stood a woman who had just seen the end of her old world and the beginning of a new one. She reached out. She did not touch him this time. She simply held her hand near his in the space between them. She thanked him. He looked at her hand. He did not pull away. He said they were not done yet. The weave would need more than one touch. It would need a new rhythm. And he was the only one there who knew how to dance to a broken beat. Outside, the city glowed with a softer light. The cracks were still there, but they were no longer spreading. They were holding. And for the first time in centuries, the empire breathed easy, not because it was perfect, but because it was finally allowed to be imperfect. Elias stood beside her. He was ready for what came next. The quiet days were over. The real work had just begun. The quiet did not last long. 3 days after the chamber incident, the alarms returned. This time they did not chime, they screamed. Elias stood by his window and watched the blue lights of the city turn red. The smooth hum of the palace twisted into a harsh, grinding noise. Heavy boots echoed in the halls. The pure had moved. They did not wait for councils or votes. They took the gates first, then the communication towers, then the guard stations. The empire fractured from the inside out. Elias did not panic. He locked his door. He gathered a few simple things, a water flask, a small light, a metal tool he kept hidden. He knew confinement was coming. Humans had survived sieges before. He prepared for a short one. The door did not break. It slid open with a sharp hiss. 4 guards in dark armor stepped in. They did not look at his face. They pointed their weapons at the floor. The leader spoke a single word, contained. They led him down a narrow service stairwell. The air grew cold. The walls felt dead. No hum, no light veins, just cold stone and damp air. They locked him in a small room with no windows. A single vent blew stale air. They left without a word. Elias sat on the hard floor. He listened. Far above, he heard the muffled sounds of conflict, alarms, shouting, the deep thud of failing power grids. The empire was tearing itself apart. The pure wanted to break the old system. They thought destruction would bring purity. They were wrong. Destruction only brings silence. Elias did not wait for rescue. He used his tool on the lock panel. Human locks were simple. Valen locks were complex, but they relied on predictable codes. He had watched them input the sequences. He had memorized the rhythm. He tapped the panel in a broken pattern. The lock clicked. The door slid open a few inches. He squeezed through. The corridor was dark. Emergency strips glowed faint red. He moved quietly. He used the walls to guide him. He knew the palace layout. He had studied it for weeks. He avoided the main halls. He took the service routes. He passed empty rooms. He passed broken consoles. He saw the decay up close. The weave was bleeding. He could feel it in his teeth, a dull pressure, a wrong rhythm. The Valen mind could not handle this. It was built for order. Chaos was a poison to them, but to him it was just noise, and noise could be read. He reached the lower archives. The doors were sealed, but the power was failing. He pried the manual release. The door groaned open. Inside, rows of crystal data stands stood silent. He found the xenobiology wing. It was untouched. The files were locked, but the backup terminal was old. It used basic code. He connected his metal tool to the port. The screen flickered to life. He typed fast. He searched for human files. He searched for baseline adaptation. He found them. The records were old. They were marked forbidden. The text explained everything. The Valen had spent millennia smoothing their genes. They removed stress responses. They removed neural plasticity. They made themselves perfect, but they also made themselves rigid. When the weave changed, they could not change with it. Their brains locked. Their systems failed, but humans were different. Humans evolved in ice, fire, flood, and famine. Their brains were built to find patterns in chaos. Their nerves adapted to new inputs. Their minds bent under pressure. They were not weak. They were universal adapters. The word hit him hard. He was not a guest. He was a bridge, a living connector. His biology was the missing piece. The perfect empire had forgotten how to survive. The broken species had survived everything. He closed the terminal. The truth sat heavy in his chest. The pure thought they were saving the empire by breaking it. They were killing it. The weave needed flexibility. It needed a mind that could hold chaos without breaking. It needed a human mind. He left the archive. He ran now. The corridors were darker. The air was thin. Support systems were failing sector by sector. He followed the sound of the failing core. It pulled at him like a magnet. His head throbbed. His vision blurred. He saw flashes of broken glass, of tangled wires, of falling rain. He pushed through it. He climbed a spiral stair. He crossed a narrow bridge over a dark shaft. The palace shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. A low groan echoed through the stone. Something was dying. He could not let it happen. He reached the core chamber. The heavy doors were blown open. Smoke hung in the air. The room was vast. In the center, the weave core pulsed in erratic bursts. Crystal strands hung from the ceiling like broken vines. They sparked and dimmed. Lyria was there. She stood in the center of the room, but she was not standing. She was held in a web of glowing resin. Her eyes were closed. Her face was pale. Wires ran from her spine into the core. She had tried to hold it together alone. She had pushed herself past the limit. The system was pulling her in. It was eating her thoughts. It was trying to force order through her mind. It could not. She was Valen. She was perfect. She could not bend. She was breaking. Elias stepped forward. The air burned his lungs. The noise was deafening. He did not cover his ears. He listened. He heard the fear in the hum. He heard the panic in the light. He walked to the edge of the platform. He looked at the control console. It was dead. He looked at the resin cage. It was thick. He looked at Lyria. He saw the strain in her jaw. He saw the tears on her cheeks. She was fighting a war she could not win. He knew what he had to do. He stepped onto the platform. He found the manual release lever. He pulled it. The resin hissed and parted. The wires detached from her spine with a soft snap. She slumped forward. He caught her. Her skin was cold. Her breath was shallow. He laid her gently on the safe floor. He looked up at the interface cradle. It was a curved seat of dark metal and glowing glass. No Valen had survived direct immersion in a failing core. The feedback would burn out a perfect mind. It would shatter a rigid brain, but Elias was not perfect. He was human. He was built for the storm. He did not hesitate. He sat in the cradle. He pulled the neural bands over his head. They were cold. They fit tight. He closed his eyes. He took a slow breath. He pressed the activation plate. The world dissolved. Pain hit him first, sharp, white, hot. It felt like his skull was cracking open. Then came the noise, 1,000 voices, 1,000 broken signals. The weave poured into him. It did not ask permission. It did not care about his limits. It just flooded his mind. He did not fight it. He opened the gates. He let it wash over him. He felt the fractures. He felt the fear. He felt the desperate need for order. He thought of Earth. He thought of storms. He thought of jazz. He thought of hands building fires in the dark. He gave it all to the current. He offered it not a wall but a net, not a command but a rhythm. The pain faded into heat. The heat faded into light. He was falling. He was rising. He was holding it all. If perfection was what was killing them, then it was time the galaxy met a little imperfection. He let go, and the weave caught him. The world vanished. There was no floor, no ceiling, no air, only light and sound. Elias floated in a sea of broken threads. They pulsed like wounded nerves. They twisted and snapped. They screamed in a language without words. The Valen weave was not a machine. It was a living thing. It was memory and biology and energy woven together, and it was tearing itself apart. The perfect minds that built it had tried to force straight lines on a wild river. The river fought back. Now it was drowning in its own chaos. Elias felt the pressure crush against his skull. His vision blurred into white and gold. Pain shot down his arms. It felt like his bones were vibrating. He did not pull away. He did not close his mind. He opened it wider. Human brains were not built for stillness. They were built for movement, for change, for finding shapes in the dark. Elias let the noise flood in. He did not try to sort it. He did not try to fix it. He just listened. He felt the jagged edges of the fractures. He felt the panic in the dying currents. He felt the desperate pull of a system that only knew one way to work. When that way broke, it had nothing left. Elias breathed in the chaos. He matched his heartbeat to the erratic pulse. Slow. Then fast. Then slow again. He remembered the sound of heavy rain on a tin roof. He remembered the uneven rhythm of a drum played by a tired soldier. He remembered the way children sang off-key to calm themselves. He remembered the sound of tools hitting stone after a storm. He did not push order into the weave. He pushed rhythm. He pushed acceptance. He pushed the simple truth that broken things can still hold together if they are allowed to bend. The light around him shifted. The screaming softened. It became a low, rolling hum. The threads stopped snapping, they began to drift. They touched each other, they tangled. Instead of trying to straighten them, Elias let them knot. He guided them with gentle mental pressure. He showed the weave how storms work, how wind finds cracks and turns them into songs, how a bent tree does not fall. It leans into the gale. The veil and logic in the system tried to resist. It pushed back with cold, rigid commands. It demanded perfect alignment. It failed. Elias did not argue. He simply let the chaos flow around the commands until they dissolved. The weave understood. It had been starving for flexibility. It drank the new pattern. The fractures did not seal shut. They braided. They crossed over each other. They formed a mesh instead of a wall. The energy that had been bleeding into the dark found new paths. It flowed through the knots. It lit up dead channels. The hum deepened. It became rich. It became steady. Pain gave way to clarity. The white light turned to soft blue. The heat in his skull cooled into a steady warmth. Elias felt every corner of the palace. He felt the outer rings waking up. He felt the failing life support grids catch and hold. He felt the distant colonies blink back to life as the weave stretched its new arms across the sky. The system was no longer fragile. It was resilient. It had learned how to absorb shock. It had learned how to breathe. High above the core chamber, the purest override nodes sparked. They were built to force a clean reset. They could not handle the braided pattern. They overloaded. Their glass casings cracked. Their power cores burned out in quick, sharp flashes. The rebellion main weapon turned to ash. The coup collapsed before it could finish. The dark armor factions lost their control. The palace security grids reset to neutral. The empire did not fall. It shifted. Elias opened his eyes, or he thought he did. He was still in the cradle, but the heavy bands felt light. The neural threads retracted from his skin. They did not tear. They slipped away like water. He sat up slowly. His body trembled. His hands shook. Sweat soaked his shirt. His head felt empty and full at the same time. He took a deep breath. The air in the chamber was clean. It carried a faint scent of ozone and warm stone. The harsh grinding was gone. In its place was a deep, steady pulse. It sounded like a giant heart beating in time with his own. He swung his legs over the edge of the platform. His boots hit the floor. They felt solid. He stood. His knees buckled for a second. He caught himself on the railing. He was tired. He was sore, but he was whole. He was human, and that was exactly what the system had needed. He turned to look at Lyria. She still lay on the floor where he had left her, but her breathing was easy now. Her skin had lost its pale, sickly tone. Color returned to her cheeks. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, calm rhythm. The wires that had drained her were dark and still. She was no longer feeding the failing core. The core was feeding itself, and it was sharing its strength with her. Elias knelt beside her. He did not touch her. He just watched. He waited. Her eyelids fluttered, then they opened. Her dark eyes focused on the ceiling. They blinked slowly. They turned to him. There was no fear in them now, no imperial distance, no polite mask. She saw him. She saw the sweat on his face, the shake in his hands, the quiet strength in his posture. She saw the catalyst. She saw the man who had walked into a storm and taught it how to dance. Tried to sit up. Elias moved quickly. He placed a hand under her shoulder. He helped her rise. She leaned against him for a moment. Her weight was light. Her breathing was warm against his neck. She whispered a single word, alive. He nodded. He said the weave was alive too, it just needed room to move. She closed her eyes. A single tear traced her cheek. She said they spent centuries building walls against chaos. They thought chaos was the enemy. He said chaos is just change wearing a loud mask. You do not fight it, you learn its steps. She let out a soft breath that sounded like a laugh. She pulled back slightly. She looked at the core above them. The crystal strands glowed with a deep, woven light. They crossed and curved. They were beautiful. They were imperfect. They were strong. The heavy doors to the chamber groaned. They slid open. Guards stood in the doorway. They wore the dark armor of the pure, but their weapons were lowered. Their helmets were off. Their faces were pale with shock. They had felt the shift. They had felt the nodes burn out. They had felt the palace breathe again. Their leader stepped forward. He looked at the core. He looked at Lyria. He looked at Elias. He dropped to one knee. The guards followed. They did not speak. They did not need to. The empire had not fallen. It had changed, and the change had a human face. Elias helped Lyria to her feet. She stood tall. The weakness was gone. Her eyes were clear. She looked at the kneeling guards and told them to rise. She told them the war was over. She told them the old rules were dead. She said they would learn to live with the cracks. She said they would learn to bend. The guards bowed their heads. They backed away slowly. The doors closed. Silence returned, but it was not the old silence. It was a quiet full of life, a quiet full of possibility. Lyria turned to Elias. She reached out. Her hand hovered near his. This time she did not pull back. She let her fingers brush his. There was no spark, no jolt, just warmth, just contact, just two different species standing in the ruins of perfection looking at the future. Elias looked at their joined hands. He thought about the journey, the quiet halls, the flickering walls, the fear, the fight, the dive into the storm. They had wanted a savior who could fix everything with a single touch. They had wanted a perfect solution to a perfect problem, but the galaxy was not perfect. It never would be. He had not fixed it. He had simply shown it how to survive. He had taught it how to bend. And in doing so, he had saved them all. The palace hummed around them. It was no longer a machine trying to hold back the dark. It was a living thing breathing with the rhythm of a broken, beautiful world. Elias stood beside the queen. He was ready for tomorrow, not because he had all the answers, but because he knew how to live with the questions. The storm had passed. The weaving had begun. And for the first time in centuries, the empire was truly awake. The months that followed were quiet but not empty. The palace hummed with a new rhythm. It was not the sharp, perfect tone of the old days. It was softer, deeper. It rose and fell like breathing. The blue light in the walls pulsed in gentle waves. Outside the high windows, the city of Valen changed. Scaffolding replaced broken towers. Workers in simple cloth moved alongside guards in polished armor. They did not hide the cracks in the stone. They filled them with dark resin and left them visible. The empire no longer tried to erase its scars. It learned to wear them. The weave had survived. More than that, it had grown. The braided pattern Elias fed it spread across the spire world and out to the distant colonies. Planets that had gone dark for years slowly woke up. Their skis filled with soft light again. Their machines started to run, but they did not return to the old rigid code. They ran on a flexible network. It could shift. It could absorb stress. It could break in small ways without collapsing. The Valen scholars called it the hybrid weave. Elias called it common sense. Nothing stays perfect forever. The smart move is to learn how to mend it. The court changed too. The word baseline disappeared from official records. It was replaced with a new term, adaptive. Humans were no longer viewed as fragile guests or political decorations. They were studied, not as lab subjects but as teachers. Valen doctors and engineers traveled to Earth. They sat in dusty clinics and watched human doctors treat injuries with simple tools and steady hands. They watched farmers read the weather in the clouds. They watched builders raise walls on uneven ground. They learned that human strength did not come from flawless bodies or sharp minds. It came from patience, from trial, from the willingness to fail and try again. Diplomats who once spoke in cold, measured tones now asked different questions. They did not ask about human weapons or trade quotas. They asked how people endured long winters. They asked how communities rebuilt after floods. They asked how children learned to share when there was not enough food. Elias answered them when he could. He did not give grand speeches. He told simple stories. He spoke of neighbors pulling each other from mud, of soldiers sharing water, of elders teaching the young how to listen to the wind. The Valen listened closely. They took notes. They began to change their own laws. They made room for mistakes. They allowed debate. They stopped punishing slow progress and started rewarding steady effort. Lyria stood at the center of it all. She was no longer the distant queen wrapped in silence. She walked the halls in plain clothes. She sat with workers in the lower districts. She visited the new schools where Valen children learned human history alongside their own. She did not rule from a throne anymore. She ruled from a table, a long wooden table where engineers, farmers, guards, and scholars sat together. They argued, they disagreed, they compromised. The empire did not break from it. It grew stronger. The rigid perfection of the past was gone. In its place stood something messy, loud, and alive. On the anniversary of the weaving, the grand hall was open to all. No guards blocked the doors. No strict dress codes were enforced. People came in work clothes, in simple robes, in patched jackets. They brought food from different worlds. They shared music that did not follow perfect scales. It was loud, it was uneven, it was beautiful. Lyria stood at the front of the room. She wore the old ceremonial crown. It was heavy. It was made of sharp metal and cold gems. It had been worn by queens for 1,000 years. It represented order, control, distance. She looked at the crowd. She looked at the new banners hanging from the ceiling. They showed crossed threads, not straight lines. They showed hands joining, not fists raised. She reached up, her fingers touched the cold metal, she lifted it slowly. The room went quiet. Thousands of eyes watched her. She did not place it on a stand. She did not return it to the vault. She walked to the side of the room. She walked to a simple wooden chair. Elias sat there. He wore a plain dark tunic. He held a cup of warm drink. He looked up as she approached. She smiled. It was a small, genuine smile. She placed the crown on the armrest beside his chair. It rested there heavy and quiet. A symbol laid to rest. A choice made clear. She was not above him. She was beside him. The marriage had begun as a treaty. It had become a partnership. Equal, grounded, real. He looked at the crown. He looked at her. He did not speak. He simply reached out and covered her hand with his. The room held its breath. Then slowly the crowd began to cheer. Not the measured, polite applause of the old court. This was loud. This was warm. This was human. Lyria sat in the chair next to his. They did not take the center stage. They let the people celebrate. They let the empire breathe. Later that night, Elias stood on the high balcony. The wind was cool. The city spread out below him. The lights pulsed in steady, breathing waves. The dark spaces between them were not empty. They were rest. They were space to grow. He leaned against the stone railing. He felt the quiet hum of the weave through the floor. It felt familiar now. It felt like home. Footsteps approached behind him. He did not turn. He knew the rhythm. Lyria stepped beside him. She wore a simple cloak. Her hair was loose. She rested her arms on the railing. They stood in silence for a long time. It was not the heavy silence of the past. It was comfortable. It was shared. Spoke softly. She said the outer colonies reported stable grids. She said the harvest on the southern ring was good. She said the children in the new schools asked questions without fear. He nodded. He said Earth sent a message. They wanted to send teachers, not soldiers, not traders, teachers. She smiled. She said they would be welcome. She said the galaxy had spent too long building walls. It was time to build bridges. He agreed. He looked up at the sky. The stars were bright. They were not perfect. Some were old. Some were dying. Some were just born. They burned anyway. They did not wait for perfect conditions. They just shone. He thought about the long road. The quiet halls, the fear, the storm, the dive into the dark. They had wanted a ruler who could control everything. They had wanted a perfect king to match a perfect queen, but the universe did not work that way. Life was messy. It was unpredictable. It broke and mended and broke again. Survival did not belong to the flawless. It belonged to the stubborn, to those who refused to stop, to those who kept moving when the path vanished. Lyria shifted. Her hand found his. Her fingers laced through his. There was no spark, no jolt, no sudden pull, just warmth, just steady pressure, just two hands holding on in the dark. He squeezed back. He felt the pulse in her wrist. It matched his own, slow, steady, alive. The stars did not need perfect rulers. They did not need flawless systems. They needed stubborn hearts. They needed people willing to step into the storm and teach it how to bend. And humanity, they had been doing that since the first spark in the dark, since the first fire in the cold, since the first hand reaching out to pull another up from the dirt. They were not the strongest. They were not the fastest. They were simply the ones who refused to quit. And in a galaxy that had forgotten how to bend, that refusal was the greatest power of all. The wind picked up. It carried the sound of music from the lower city. It carried the smell of rain on warm stone. Elias closed his eyes. He listened. He felt the weight of the empire around him. It was not a burden. It was a promise. He opened his eyes. He looked at Lyria. She was looking at him, not as a queen, not as a savior, as a partner. He smiled. The night was long, the work was not done, but they were ready. They had each other, and they had learned the most important truth of all. Perfection does not save worlds, persistence does, and they had plenty of that to go around. The city hummed below them, the stars burned above them, and in the quiet space between, two different species stood together, watching the dawn begin.